Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Arthritis at Home. I'm Kelly Lendvoy, VP of Communications and Public Affairs at Arthritis Consumer Experts. And today, we're going to look at the long and winding road towards drug development, review, and public reimbursement in Canada. This process is designed to ensure that the makers of drugs and medications, the pharmaceutical manufacturers, bring their new medications to market in a safe, effective, and cost-effective way. While this process can be lengthy and it is complex, it's really critical in ensuring that the health and well-being of Canadians is maintained and to ensure that our public drug plans meet the needs of Canadian patients now and in the future. To look at this issue today, we're joined by Cheryl Koehn, president and founder of ACE. Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Nice to be here with you again.
Well, I know this is a really favorite subject of yours, so I'm glad you could join us today and kind of take us through the labyrinth, take us through this maze of different important stages and phases that is part of this process. And maybe to begin, why are we spending this time on the drug review process? Why is it important for Canadians, and why is it important particularly for patients with inflammatory arthritis, Cheryl?
The most important thing I could say about it, and this is certainly true from my own perspective as a person living for a long time with rheumatoid arthritis, is that ultimately, Kelly, the more we know, we meaning consumers / patients, know about what goes into a drug's development or medication's development, how it's actually tested and deemed to be safe to enter the marketplace, how it's priced, how governments who spend, frankly, our money on these medicines, it's taxpayer funded medicine provision, right? Reimbursement. Knowing all of that as a patient, I think gives us ultimate confidence in the things that we're being prescribed by our healthcare providers. It's that kind of good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will, at all stages of a medicine coming from discovery to the bedside, as they would say. So I think it's actually a confidence thing more than anything. And you only are confident in taking that medicine and sticking with it in the setting of chronic disease that's incurable. We don't know what cures it. I think that's part of a very important recipe for success as a patient. Having that knowledge, Kelly, I think it helps us make decisions about what medication to try and whether it's going to hold value for us and, frankly, for our fellow patients.
Well, let's start this long and winding road for our listeners and viewers. And that begins with drug discovery and development. So before review, there's a very, very important phase, and that is identifying and testing at very early stages a new drug. What's involved in this discovery and development phase?
So this is going to be super high level. It's certainly more detailed in the JointHealth Insight that you mentioned is on our website, jointhealth.org. And I know you'll be providing a link at the end of this video to that issue. Actually, medication discovery, or what is known in the industry as drug discovery, really starts with the problem, Kelly. It starts with the health problem. And there are problems that face the health of the world population. And there are unmet needs in the treatment of those things. And it's identifying at the basic science level. Well, it's actually the part of the health researcher on the other end of the spectrum, the public health researcher, the epidemiologist. Those are the people who are actually furthest away from the bench science they're the ones that help describe the bigger problem worldwide. And trying to meet together with basic scientists and letting them know what paths are worth following, I think, is a really important first step. Then basic scientists, and not just in the pharmaceutical industry, there is drug discovery and development in the pharmaceutical industry, but there's also that same activity in academia. So at medical schools, schools that have basic science programs. And there are those types of universities with that type of specialized science training going on around the world. University of British Columbia, University of Toronto, University of Manitoba, I mean, on and on and on. We have medical schools across the country where basic science is a very thriving part of their curricula. And it's identifying molecules that can address a health need, an unmet health need, either in academia or in pharmaceutical worlds, right? And that's the very start. You look at the world population, the epidemiologic studies to know where the problems are, where the unmet needs are. And then you go search targets and you start testing those in lab settings. And then if in fact one of those compounds, molecules, shows promise, then you begin what is truly the drug discovery process. Phase 1 is where you're really doing the nitty-gritty lab work. Phase 2, and you're testing it in healthy individuals. Then
and animals as well.
Well, animals first in little petri dishes, right? It's the stuff that is pre-vivo, so not in vivo, in other words, animal studies. Then you're going to go into humans. That's phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, actually, the first trials in humans are in healthy humans, because you don't want a trial, and those are all volunteer. Usually, those volunteers are paid to volunteer for those types of studies. And it shows whether something is safe in a healthy human. So someone not with that problem. Then you move that science or that research into the people who are affected by the problem for which you're doing research. And then it goes into large clinical studies. So that's kind of a really compressed answer, Kelly, to that question of what are the different phases. There's phase 1, 2, 3, and there's actually phase 4, which is post-marketing. So if a drug is successful through those stages, Kelly, it's not enough that they actually get the what they call a DIN number or an NOC, notice of compliance, from our regulator, Health Canada. Then there is post-market surveys, research to be done to make sure that it stays safe and efficacious once it goes out into the marketplace. So hopefully that makes sense to the audience in very brief form.
It's interesting to note that, this curtain is usually drawn, and we don't really get to see behind the curtain when it comes to drug discovery and development. But one thing over the past 3 years, and certainly at the very beginning, let's say, of the COVID pandemic, was the race for a vaccine. And a lot of the descriptions and terms that you've just used all of a sudden became part of a sort of daily exchange of information from media to consumers. And we sort of followed those phases that you just described in real time as we were anxiously waiting for a COVID vaccination. So in a way, there was a public health educational benefit as part of that process.
That's absolutely true. That's a great point, Kelly. The world received basically Science 101 knowledge translation especially in that first year and a half, as we waited for vaccine and waited for treatments, right? So you're quite right. Those phases should be somewhat more familiar to the general public, certainly to what I call the patient public, than prior to the pandemic.
We should also note before we go to the next stage that we're using the term drug today. Normally, in all of our education materials and joint health communications, we use the term medication, but we are using drugs today, and that's because the regulatory and reimbursement bodies that we're now going to look at use it in all their materials. So if people go to websites at Health Canada or the Provincial Ministry of Health websites, they will find the word drug, and that's the same as us referring it to as a medication in our materials. So let's go to this next stage. And I mentioned earlier, the next stage, which is the drug review process, is designed to look at the safety, efficacy, and cost effectiveness of this drug that has gone through years and years of study that you've just described. Can you walk us through this drug review process, beginning with Health Canada's role?
Yeah, so just to be clear for the audience, these phases that I spoke of, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are really under the purview of the federal government, our regulatory body called Health Canada. It is part of the drug review process. It's that early stage. But really, in our Joint Health Insight, we separate the rest of the drug review process into stages. And stage 1, after it gets the A-OK from Health Canada, Kelly, it then goes into a process that is really focused on value, right? And that's the PMPRB and
Patented Medicine Prices Review Board.
Pricing Review Board, right?
Yeah.
And then concurrently, the health technology assessment process, which is done by CADTH.
CADTH is the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health.
Also in the province of Quebec, that does its own cost effectiveness analysis through another acronym called INES. Forgive me if I mispronounce any of this, but it's Institut National d'Excellence en Santé et Services Sociaux. While this quasi-judicial sort of body, the Patented Medicines Review Board, Pricing Review Board, does its work, a provincial, territorial, and federal group that fund a process called the drug review process, or by CADTH, pardon me, they began looking at, is this going to be not just effective, is it going to be cost effective? Will the Canadian taxpayer and patients prescribed these medicines be given value for their health? And it's a science in and of itself, Kelly, to deciding whether something is cost effective. So those different groups look at value, for lack of a better way of putting it.
The next stage, as you've identified, which is really a price negotiation at the provincial and territorial level. And maybe you can just walk us through that, because I think that's sort of where the rubber hits the road for patients, because it's getting so much closer to them in terms of where they live. And it's those publicly funded drug plans, as you identified, taxpayer public drug plans, that are involved in this final stage in the pathway.
Yeah, so this group usually, once something comes out of CADTH and they say, yes, this is worth listing, we think that your citizens in your province or territory will derive value from this medicine, they then appoint one of the provinces to lead a negotiation that is supposed to be pan-Canadian. So, right, one province steps up, takes the file. It's a way of distributing the work to be done, basically, and says, okay, we will lead the negotiation with the company that's bringing this particular medicine forward. And they negotiate a price that is supposed to be the price for everyone. And, you know, all of these phases, Kelly, none of the stuff that had to do with health technology assessment used to exist 20 years ago. And every time a new piece of the review process was plugged in, it lengthened the time it would take to get the medicine to someone like me or you or others watching in our audience. So that's a bit of an aside, but a very important one, that the drug review process in many ways has been lengthened, not reduced, which was an overarching goal of advocates like myself who started learning about this process almost 30 years ago, advocating for more, not shoddily done drug review processes by Health Canada, but more efficient ones so that people could get to medicines more quickly. Anyway, these pricing negotiations go on. They're made known to the provincial pharmacare program heads. And then usually, Kelly, the province or the territory, some of them don't actually end up going on to lists. Now, you know, our audience and patients may say, call foul on that, right? Because they had hopes that through this lengthy, for the most part, very well done process here in Canada would deliver a new medicine to them. But that's not always the case, because sometimes provinces just say, well, we can't afford it, right? And so this saying about the right drug and the right person at the right time at the right price doesn't always hold true, though it should, if we're actually aiming to get people in a more improved health state. Usually there's another agreement that's struck behind closed doors at the provincial level, so further negotiations go on. And then the province makes public its decision to either list it on its formulary or not. And most of the time, new medicines are listed to provincial formularies, Kelly. They're listed with a pile of restrictions. So you have to meet, and in some ways that's a good thing, because there are many older generic drugs that should be tried first in someone to see if that very cost-effective medicine can work for them. But there's a reasonable period of time in which to do that. And then when it exceeds that, that person should have access to the latest medications when it's listed on a formulary. So it's called special authorization. It's very complicated. People can read more about that on our website.
We should remind our audience as well that it is precisely at this drug reimbursement review stage where we created the arthritis medications report card to actually measure, grade, and rank those provinces and territories in terms of their process, in terms of those final decisions you said about listing or not listing, or going through a lengthy review process that is not satisfactory for patients as well. So just a reminder, our audience, I'm sure, has heard about a report card and has probably looked at a report card. It's precisely designed to address this particular stage.
Yeah, it's a way to try to hold provincial and territorial formularies accountable, Kelly, to the public by showing what their performance is. By in real time, we update it every month online. We're actually in the process of doing a bit of an overhaul on the report card, which should be complete later this year. But it's something actually that government goes to and takes a look at, because they do care about this report card. They check it to see where they're at.
Now, on this complex review process that you've just described, we know obviously that the pharmaceutical manufacturer is involved and is able to provide input. We also know that clinicians and researchers from different diseases and disease areas are also consulted. We haven't talked about patient involvement or patient input. What is that? How important is it? And how is it collected?
So Arthritis Consumer Experts was one of the first organizations in the country, patient organizations, to provide its formal input into the CADTH process. So this provincial, territorial, federal effort to assess the cost effectiveness of a drug. It's a process that we partly helped design along with a few others. Arthritis, the arthritis community writ large, Kelly, have probably submitted more patient inputs to CADTH than any other disease area, primarily because this whole process started when biologics came to the forefront. Very expensive medications, and there had to be a way for patients to be able to say how valuable these were to our disease area. So that's one of the reasons why we have had so many, and we've had a boom in drug discovery in our area where prior to the past 30 years, it was like a desert. We had no new medicines in our area, in our disease area, in inflammatory arthritis in particular. So that's another reason why you've seen such participation from the arthritis community. So yes, patients have input. CADTH, and it can actually be done on an individual basis. Usually it's preferred to have it go through a patient organization like Arthritis Consumer Experts. And when CADTH issues a call for input, we then turn around, Kelly, and send out that questionnaire through a SurveyMonkey form to gather people's real-time thoughts and opinions and experiences with that medication, with their disease. It's all anonymous, it's all protected. We then collate it and send it off to CADTH. So we've been doing that from day one of the patient input process. There are a few other provinces that have calls for patient input: British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec. To my knowledge, no other province or territory does. Though we do write to those other jurisdictions to let them know what we think about the value of a medicine coming out of CADTH. So whether they ask for our input or not, Kelly, we give it, which I think is a really important piece of advocacy.
If any viewers have provided that patient input,
thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you can gain an appreciation how important it is that our arthritis voice is heard during this process.
Yeah.
Following on this theme of patient advocacy, you earlier mentioned about the lengthening timeline from start of drug discovery and development to finish public reimbursement. That now is lengthened to approximately 12 years and in some cases longer. And that has a real impact on people living with IA, as we've described, Cheryl. As a final question, is ACE involved in not just identifying these issues, but in advocating for change and solutions to help patients access reimbursement coverage in a timely way? Are we looking at anything or focusing on anything in particular?
Yeah, so first I want to clarify that the 12 years is not the time it takes Health Canada to review and then go on into the rest of the drug review process, which is really about the cost of a medicine. That 12 years you've quoted includes the discovery process, right?
From start to finish.
Yeah, from start to finish. So just wanted to be clear about that. And the second part of your question, Kelly, is yes, we have ideas about how we can work with governments, with clinicians, with those who are responsible for cost effectiveness review and pricing negotiation. We actually think there's a way to significantly reduce the time in the final stages, which is when it gets listed to a formulary, the time that happens after that. So let's not kid ourselves. Once something goes up on the reimbursement, on the formulary at a province or territory or the federal drug plan, there's a lot of paperwork to fill out, Kelly. And there are so many different people who need to do things. We're in a healthcare environment that is strapped for human resources, so time and money. We have patient support programs in specialty disease areas like ours that do their best to process paperwork quickly. Government has to have people there to then fill out a whole pile of forms or review the forms that are being turned in. This whole, it's a paper spider web. Like it's actually really time consuming, costly, and most of all, very frustrating and fear making for patients because you wait and wonder whether something's going to happen, right?
And in fact, we know because our members told us last year when we did a national survey on this very subject.
Yeah.
We asked for their comments, and it was overwhelming about how complex it was and how burdensome it was.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what is done in Ontario is a model for the rest of the country. And this is something we're going to be working on for the balance of this year of 2023 and into 2024. And that's to work with our clinical community, to work with our fellow patient organizations, to work with government, to create limited use categories at provincial reimbursement formularies, which is what they have in Ontario. We have a very small group of prescribers who are rheumatologists, right? There's only about 400 or so of them in the country writing these prescriptions for the more expensive drugs in our, let's say, call it our medicine chest. So that in and of itself, Kelly, is a restriction about how things are prescribed, right? They're not things that any other physician can prescribe, but rheumatologists for rheumatology patients. And there are ways to do audits electronically of prescribing for those types of medicines. In other words, once it's listed under a limited use category, a specialty physician like our rheumatologist should be able to write the script, hand it to the patient, and they go to the pharmacy and get it filled. And we cut out all of the costs and the time and the hassle and the emotional burden that is placed on the patient and placed on the other stakeholders in the system to get on medicine appropriately and in a much more timely fashion. So that's something, Ontario does. It's a model. Why other provinces don't do it is a mystery to us. But we're going to unravel the mystery and begin doing, I think, just some old-fashioned knowledge translation to other formularies, to other pharmacare programs who may not be fully aware of the way Ontario's formulary works, and hope that they will listen to us and work with us to develop this new listing category in order to make things more efficient time-wise, but also cost-wise.
So from the long and winding road of drug review to a magical mystery tour of limited use, that's a wrap. I mean, this has been a rather long episode, but as we said at the outset, it's very complex, but it's so important to all of you viewers and listeners. And we hope it's sparked some interest and curiosity to get more information. So hopefully you're going to receive this issue of JointHealth Insight, or else you can find it on our website. Have a look at it. Would really like to get your comments as well, either through this Arthritis at Home channel, or you can send it to us directly. But it is something that we follow every day in our lives at ACE on an educational or an advocacy perspective, and we will continue to do so. Cheryl, thank you again for taking us through the subject.
Thank you, Kelly.
And we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Arthritis at Home. Goodbye.